Well, last year when there was a lot of discussion about this, arguing that we should have an audit of our relationship with China and then have a published strategy for dealing with China, that was on hold under the last government, and it seems to be also mysteriously not on the table yet under this one. I think there'd be two things that I would insist on. First is evidence-based policies. So if you say, we've got to get on with China as well as possible, with the sort of Mandelson view, we've got to do that. Well, in Mandelson's case, his company did have a lot of clients who were Chinese. We've got to get on with them, otherwise we won't be able to trade with them, and we won't be able to get them to sign up to international agreements. Well, Chinese don't do business with us just because we cower, which we very often do. They do business with us if they want to buy things that we make at a reasonable price. If you think back to Australia, when the Australians challenged the Chinese about the outbreak in Wuhan of coronavirus, and Wang Yi, who was foreign minister then and is again now, as you know, coming to this country this week, Wang Yi said, well, what had happened in Wuhan was entirely manageable and not transmissible. And while he was saying that, the Chinese Communist Party was buying hand over fist PPE equipment from Australia. So the Australians, understandably, made fuss and said there should be a WHO inquiry. At which point the Chinese government said they weren't going to buy anything else from Australia. Huge fuss about it. 2 years later, Australian exports to China were higher than they'd ever been. Why? Because the Chinese government needed lithium, they needed barley for making delicious beer, and they needed iron ore and rice. So they bought it. We talk about the importance of having a, quote, good relationship with them because of investment in this country. A Chinese investment in this country is, I think, 0.2% of total foreign direct investments. If you look at the profits made by the City of London, 0.4% come from any businesses associated with China. So the evidence is, and if you think about it, the evidence when I was having lots of arguments with China, that the British exports during that period went up faster than they'd been in the previous period and went up faster than those of any other OECD countries. So first of all, do business on the basis of evidence, not on being frightened into accepting that the Chinese Communist Party has a sort of perpetual mandate of heaven. And the other point I've touched on, you say quite properly that we want to engage China in order to have agreements on epidemic disease, dealing with it. We want to have agreements on the environment. But we should just remember that they may sign agreements, but they break them. What happened in Hong Kong with the Joint Declaration, which at the Chinese suggestion was tabled as a treaty at the UN. So the first thing I think that we should do is have a policy which is based on evidence rather than mush. The mush school of diplomacy. And the other thing I think is very important is that we shouldn't demean ourselves. We should stand up for our own values. The Adlai Stevenson point. Everybody else is going to. And if we don't stand up for our values, and then sooner or later they'll be trashed. So those are the two things I would insist on best. And if you want to know where a very good strategy for dealing with China was set out, I wrote an article in the New Statesman last year which disappeared into thin air, but actually set out what I thought a strategy on China should be. I'll send a copy to Steve and one or two other people if they want it. And unfortunately, the New Statesman managed to more or less lose it, but it set out what I thought we should do with China. I'm not in favour of being antagonistic, certainly I don't argue with the Chinese people. My argument is with the Chinese Communist Party, and I refuse to accept that in order to perform as a normal, open society, we should always do so on our knees. And it doesn't seem to me that it's either sensible or necessary in order to work with China when it's possible. Talking about the government's policy on China, Keir Starmer said it must be one of engagement, of cooperation, and of challenge. Well, you can't be against engagement when it's possible. You can't be against cooperation when it's possible. But you don't see much of the challenge. And the fact that I feel very strongly that when the Chinese break their word, when they behave badly, we should say so openly, because they don't like it, and it might get them to behave better. So, there's a few thoughts, but anyway, New Statesman, look it up on Wikipedia or whatever. Thanks very much.